All right, today we are going back in time. And I mean way back. We're talking before science, before organized religion, before history was really even a thing people wrote down. We are going right to the moment when, for the first time in the West, people stopped telling stories about gods to explain the world and started asking a brand new, totally radical question. What is all of this really? For most of human history, if you wanted to know why it was thundering, the answer was pretty simple. A god was angry. Why do the seasons change? Oh, that was a deal struck between some deities. Things like Hesiod's Theogony weren't just epic poems, they were basically the science textbooks of their day. They explained that the world was just a stage for divine drama. You got high winds out at sea? Well, that's just the god Typhus having a really bad day. Everything, and I mean everything, had a supernatural cause.
And that was the way it was for thousands and thousands of years. So what on earth could be powerful enough to break a pattern like that? Well, in a word, civilization. See, for millennia, human life was just about pure survival. Finding food, not getting eaten, all your brain power went into just not dying today. But then as agriculture started to work and cities began to form, something incredible happened. We got a surplus. We had extra food, extra safety, and most importantly, we had surplus brain power. It's kind of like the difference between the survivors in The Walking Dead, who are always on the run, and the people in Woodbury, who've got walls and time to think about stuff other than zombies. That free time, that cognitive surplus, it created the space for a totally new kind of thinking to pop up.
And that brings us to the Ionian coast, to a busy little port city called Miletus. This is where we meet the guy who a lot of people consider the very first philosopher. His name was Thales. Now, Thales wasn't just some random dude with too much time on his hands. He was brilliant. He was highly educated in geometry, in astronomy, and he was also a legendary businessman. There's this famous story about him using his knowledge of weather patterns to predict a huge olive harvest. He quietly went and bought up all the olive presses in the area, totally cornered the market, and made a fortune. And he mostly did it just to prove that he could. This was a mind that saw patterns in the world, not the whims of the gods. And this is his revolutionary leap. Thales looked at the world around him, the ocean, the sky, the earth, and he just decided that the stories about gods weren't a good enough explanation. He believed there had to be a rational, a natural cause for why things are the way they are. He is the first person we know of to basically say, hey, maybe the universe isn't magical. Maybe it's a system, and maybe we can actually understand it. This was the big question for Thales and all the thinkers who came after him, who we now call the Pre-Socratics. If the world isn't made of divine magic, what's its fundamental ingredient? What's the one underlying stuff that everything else is just a different version of? This whole search for a single origin substance, it's got a name: Monism. It's the belief that even with all the incredible variety in the world, rocks, trees, clouds, us, everything ultimately comes from one source material. The key thing here is they were looking for a natural source, not a supernatural one. So what did Thales think this one fundamental substance was? Water. Now here's the fascinating part. It's not about whether he was right, because spoiler alert, he wasn't. It's about his method. His reasoning was based entirely on observation. He saw that all life needs water to survive. He saw that water could exist in 3 different states: solid as ice, liquid and gas as steam. He even thought the land itself was just floating on a giant ocean. To him, water was the most versatile, essential, and common substance he could see. It was a completely rational hypothesis. Okay, so let's jump to our next thinker and see how these ideas started to evolve. While Thales was looking for some kind of stable foundation for everything, a philosopher named Heraclitus looked out at the universe and saw the exact opposite. Heraclitus argued that the most fundamental quality of the universe isn't a substance at all, but the process of change itself. He believed everything was in a constant state of flux, this perpetual dance between opposites like day and night, hot and cold. But this constant tension wasn't just chaos. He said it was governed by a universal cosmic law that he called the logos. You can kind of think of the logos as an early version of what we might call the laws of physics, an underlying rational principle that brings order to all this constant change. And this famous line illustrates his point perfectly. When you step into a river, the water molecules that touch your foot are there for just an instant before they flow away, replaced by new ones. The next time you step in, it is a completely different set of molecules.
The river looks like a single constant thing, but in reality, it's a process. It's in a permanent state of flux. And for Heraclitus, everything in the universe was just like that river. So our first two philosophers gave us these competing ideas, a stable substance versus constant change. But our next thinker, Democritus, came up with an idea so powerful, so ahead of its time, that it would be dismissed for nearly 2,000 years before science finally proved he was, in principle, astonishingly correct. Democritus was trying to solve this mind-bending puzzle posed by another philosopher named Zeno. Zeno basically argued that motion should be impossible. Think about it. To cross a room, you first have to go half the distance. Then you have to go half of the remaining distance, and then half of that distance, and so on forever. If you can always divide the space in front of you, how do you ever actually get to the other side? Democritus came up with a breathtakingly simple solution. He just hypothesized that there must be a point where you simply can't cut anymore. There must exist a smallest, fundamental, indivisible particle of matter. He called it atomos, which literally means uncuttable. And that solves Zeno's paradox. You can't divide space infinitely because, eventually, you're going to hit an atom.
His theory was incredibly complete. The universe, he said, is made of only two things: an infinite number of these tiny, uncuttable atoms, and the empty space, or the void, that they move through. These atoms are always moving, and when they collide and hook together, they form all the objects and substances that we experience in the world. It is an idea that is, in its essence, the foundation of modern chemistry and physics, that a few simple building blocks can combine to create this entire, complex universe.
This quote just nails how radical he was. Democritus was a pure rationalist. He believed our senses couldn't be trusted. The sweetness of honey or the color red, those weren't real properties out there in the world. They were just sensations produced inside us by the shapes and arrangements of different atoms. The only true reality was atoms moving through the void. Okay, so we've seen three brilliant but completely different attempts to explain the entire universe. But what's the ultimate takeaway from all this? What's the big picture? So we've got these incredible first stabs at a grand theory of everything. We have Thales arguing for water, Heraclitus arguing for constant change, and Democritus arguing for tiny, uncuttable atoms. Three brilliant theories. And from the perspective of modern science, not a single one of them was technically correct. But here's the thing. Getting the answer right wasn't the point. It was never about the final destination. Their true, lasting revolution wasn't in what they thought, but in how they thought. The crucial point is this. These thinkers invented a completely new way of seeing the world. They established these foundational principles that the universe isn't some unknowable mystery, but a puzzle that is knowable. They championed the idea that it could be explained through reason, through logic, through observation, not by appearing to supernatural beings. And they created a tradition of progress, where new ideas are built by challenging and refining old ones. They didn't just give us philosophy, they gave us the intellectual framework for science itself. And that leaves us with one final thought. These philosophers had the incredible courage to question the absolute, unquestionable truths of their time. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? What deeply held beliefs, what obvious truths of our own world will future generations look back on as just another myth we once told ourselves to explain the universe?